It was a gray dawn in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, when the first reports began filtering through the corridors of security institutions and halls of power. The clock barely marked 6 in the morning on the day federal authorities, supported by internal intelligence, were compelled to act with unusual speed. A silent alarm had been triggered from within the prison system. Some correctional officers, tasked with guarding a high-profile detainee, might pose a threat to his safety. This was neither a passing rumor nor the speculation of an unstable day. The information came through internal channels, assessed and deemed serious enough by national security to require immediate action. What followed, that very morning, marked the beginning of a controversy that would resonate throughout Nigeria and beyond. What was at stake was not simply the safety of a single individual. It was public trust in institutions, the perception of a justice system striving to consolidate itself amid long-standing tensions, and fundamentally, the boundaries between a legitimate exercise of authority and respect for human rights. In the days that followed, the internal arrest of correctional officers, the opening of disciplinary investigations, and the reinforcement of protective measures around the detainees sparked a profound debate about the reliability of the structures responsible for safeguarding those under state custody. Nigeria, like many nations, found itself facing a mirror. What happens when internal oversight is called into question, and even its own guardians appear suspect? The indirect protagonist of this story was a detainee whose name, for much of the public discourse, remained surrounded by institutional caution and respect. He was a high-profile figure, whose legal process was ongoing and whose implications extended beyond the personal to touch issues of corruption, national security, and policy accountability. Yet the center of tension was not his past or the charges against him, but the perception of vulnerability within a system tasked with guaranteeing not only justice but also fundamental human safety, even for those it prosecutes. The detention of high-profile figures in any state context is a delicate exercise. For years, Nigeria has faced structural challenges in its criminal justice system. Overcrowded prisons, limited resources, accusations of corruption, and a general public perception that impunity can find refuge even within institutions responsible for administering justice. In this case, the alarm that prompted authorities' intervention stemmed from a risk assessment based on intelligence suggesting possible collusion between prison staff and external actors with vested interests in the detainee. While the exact details of the threat remain partially confidential, the state response was clear. No risk would be taken with the life or integrity of someone in custody, regardless of reputation or public opinion. To grasp the magnitude of this episode, it is necessary to step back and observe the broader context of Nigeria's prison system. Over decades, the country's prisons have faced criticism from international organizations, human rights advocates, and multilateral agencies. Conditions in many detention centers have been described as deficient, with deteriorating infrastructure, chronic overcrowding, and a shortage of trained personnel. These deficiencies represent not only a humanitarian challenge, but also opportunities for informal power dynamics, corruption, and in some cases, abuse of authority to develop. When these structural problems combine with political and media pressure surrounding a high-profile detainee, institutional fragility becomes evident. The detainee in question had been arrested months earlier as part of a judicial process that captured national attention. For many, he symbolized a fight against corruption and abuse of power. For others, he exemplified the political polarization that characterizes contemporary Nigeria. Regardless of public perception, his case became a barometer of the state's capacity to handle highly sensitive situations. As the legal process unfolded, so did the surveillance around his custody, with high-ranking officers monitoring every movement within the prison walls. The suspicion that some correctional officers could be compromised did not emerge out of nowhere. Over time, internal investigations had flagged minor irregularities, inconsistent custody logs, unauthorized communications between guards and visitors, and unexplained changes in patrol schedules. None of these events alone were conclusive, but together they formed a pattern concerning enough to trigger alerts within the prison hierarchy and, eventually, among higher-level security agencies. The risk analysis conducted by these agencies involved discrete interviews, reviews of electronic and physical records, and the observation behavior within the penitentiary. As information accumulated, intelligence indicated the possibility of a real threat to the detainee's safety, originating from a potential internal plot. Although the exact nature of the threat has not been publicly disclosed for operational reasons, reliable sources suggested that the primary concern was that the detainee's physical integrity might be compromised, whether by coercion, external pressure, or even orders conflicting with the legal obligations of custody officers. Faced with this scenario, authorities did not hesitate. Early one cold morning, specialized teams entered the prison unit, not to release the detainee or facilitate escape, but to exercise an unprecedented form of internal control, the detention of several correctional officers under suspicion of misconduct. These officers were removed from duty and placed under formal investigation, marking an escalation in institutional scrutiny within a system previously perceived as monolithic and impermeable to internal criticism. The official announcement, delivered by the agency's spokesperson, was careful in language. It emphasized that the individuals detained were under investigation and that, at that moment, no formal charges had been filed. This distinction, seemingly minor, was essential to uphold the fundamental principle of presumption of innocence, a principle that can easily erode in the torrent of public opinion. However, the impact of these arrests was immediate. Families of the detained officers, along with public sector labor advocates, expressed consternation and demanded transparency in the investigative process. Meanwhile, the detainee's family and supporters expressed relief, seeing the action as necessary to guarantee his safety. Voices multiplied, from community leaders to human rights groups, each urging the state to balance transparency with protection of human rights and due process. Civil society organizations, including human rights coalitions and institutional transparency monitors, issued statements calling for calm, discouraging speculation, and emphasizing the importance of allowing investigations to proceed without external interference. They reminded the public that the strength of a democracy is measured not only by its capacity to enforce a law, but also by its commitment to fundamental principles of justice and individual rights. Meanwhile, security experts and institutional analysts began publicly debating the lessons of this episode. The general consensus was that, while the authorities' swift action could be seen as a sign of diligence, it also exposed long-term vulnerabilities in the prison system. The question was not only whether the officers had acted improperly, but why the system had reached a point where such suspicions could take root without being detected by more robust oversight mechanisms. Criticism focused in part on a lack of more sophisticated monitoring systems, such as independent audits, protected internal whistleblowing mechanisms, and continuous training for staff on ethics and human rights. The absence or weakness of these systems can create spaces where malpractice flourishes undetected. Some academics compared the situation to other countries facing similar crises, noting that institutionalizing transparent practices and accountability mechanisms is a long process requiring political will, resources, and sustained commitment from those who lead these institutions. Politically, the episode had immediate repercussions. Members of Parliament and party leaders demanded public hearings to evaluate not only the specific case, but the overall health of Nigeria's penitentiary system. Some called for deep structural reforms, while others urged that the incident not be used as a tool for political polarization. Official discourse, echoed by executive spokespersons, insisted that the investigation would be thorough, transparent, and that any proven wrongdoing would result in appropriate legal sanctions. Community leaders across the country highlighted the importance of maintaining social calm. They recalled past episodes in which misinformation and rumors led to unnecessary tensions, even violence. Citizens were urged to trust the legal process, refrain from premature judgments, and support institutions working to strengthen justice and security for all. Beyond the immediate context, the incident revealed deeper tensions between state authority and civil society in Nigeria. Public perception that security institutions can sometimes operate without adequate oversight has been a persistent source of distrust. Documented cases of abuse of power, negligence, or corruption within the penal system have been recorded by human rights organizations for years. What changed in this particular case was the visibility of the internal accountability process, initiated by the institution itself, and its media and social impact. This moment represents, in many ways, a test of the country's institutional resilience. The ability of the justice system to self-critique, correct failures, and communicate them transparently to citizens is essential to restore and maintain public trust. How the investigation unfolds, the oversight mechanisms implemented, and how legal and administrative consequences are handled for those involved will largely determine public perception of the integrity of the system as a whole. The long-term implications of this episode extend beyond the specific detainee or the officers involved. They highlight the need to strengthen chains of responsibility within security institutions, implement internal auditing systems that function independently and effectively, and ensure that human rights remain a non-negotiable priority, even when dealing with individuals involved in sensitive legal processes. Nigerian society, aware of these complexities, observed every official statement, every civil society communique, and every expert analysis with attention. Many citizens agreed that the real challenge was not merely to determine if there had been an internal threat, but to understand how a system meant to protect both society and those in custody can evolve into a model of transparency and accountability. In the weeks that followed, investigations continued with the participation of external auditors, human rights commissions, and international observers. Attention extended beyond the legal aspects of potential misconduct to a deeper examination of policies on recruitment, training, and supervision of correctional officers. National debates emerged over human dignity, due process, presumption of innocence, and imperative of balancing security with civil rights. This episode made clear that the strength of any democratic institution is measured not only by its ability to act, but by its willingness to do so with transparency, respect for the law, and sensitivity to society's ethical demands. In a country as diverse and complex as Nigeria, managing this balance is a constant challenge, but also an opportunity to demonstrate that the rule of law can prevail even in high-tension circumstances. And so, as the search for clarity, truth, and justice continued, the nation watched, not with sensational expectation, but with a calm determination to demand accountability, transparency, and respect for the fundamental principles that sustain a just society. The process was far from complete, yet it had already begun to redefine how Nigeria confronts the tensions between authority, security, and human rights, inviting citizens to actively participate in this collective endeavor. If anything was clear at the close of this chapter, it was that vigilance should not be limited to those who guard the bars, but also to those who safeguard public trust. And in this ongoing exercise of scrutiny, dialogue, and reform lies the essence of democracy aspiring to be resilient, just, and respectful of human dignity. We will continue observing, analyzing, and sharing with you the developments of this complex and crucial story.